the Sisters Minor of Mary Immaculate, founded by Mother Maria Elisabetta Patrizzi, August 14th, 1983. There have been allegations of abuse within the convent walls. Former members of the SMMI allege that they faced physical, emotional abuse, strict rules, food restrictions, and they have likened their experience to that of a cult. These are their stories, in their words. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Cult of SMMI. I'm your host, Scott Mort. It's good to be back on a regular schedule. I'm really enjoying this. Getting the stitches out tomorrow from my surgery, which went beautifully. Glasses out of my foot. I'm feeling really good. And I hope everybody listening had a good week as well. This week, we continue just the riveting conversation with Mike Kovacs. For those that don't know, Mike Kovacs' sister Teresa was one of the higher-ups. One might say the second in command of the Sisters Minor of Mary Immaculate. Now, as always, the views and experiences expressed by our podcast guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the podcast network. While we strive to provide a platform for diverse perspectives and engaging conversations, it is important to note that the experiences shared by our guests cannot be independently verified. Listeners should exercise critical thinking and consider these stories as personal anecdotes rather than established facts. There is no way to definitively refute or verify the claims made by our guests. The host and the podcast network are not responsible for any statements made by the guests during the course of the show. Listeners are encouraged to form their own judgments and seek additional information if desired. With all that legalese out of the way, here's Mike.
So Georgiana filled me in on more. So it was bad, and I still feel horrible that they broke her and then started doing all this stuff. So that was terrifying. That was absolutely, to this day, it's still terrifying. I mean, it was a good woman who, a damn good woman, at least to me. And then I know of her who wound up going, they destroyed her. So now. So Carolyn's dead. All right, so now here's where things are going. So I'm on Chat Mess. I'm putting up posts. People are not liking some of my posts, but I'm putting up my posts. People are messaging. When anybody says I want information, I go private message me. They PM me. I send them to my other, to my a fake email address that I have, and I start vetting them. And I got a lot of requests, but some of them were sketchy. And I had to kind of make sure they were legit, and a lot weren't. More than you'd think were not legit. And then I had one reporter in Australia want to do this story, but wanted me to make her exclusive to her, and I'm like, hell no. And I'm still finding out stuff, and everything was kind of stepping up together. And then I said, I got to get this out there. Now I don't know if I said this before, but somewhere in this time frame, I could not figure out how to get the word out. And it was driving me crazy because no one would listen. And I was driving home from the student's house in Colts Neck, and I'm driving Route 18 going north. And in my head, I'm like, I got to find somebody. Who do I can find? And then as I'm going through an underpass, I realized the name. It was some reporter for the New York Times. Says, get a hold of this reporter from the Times. They did stuff on Catholic abuse. And as I'm driving, something smacks my car, just does, and I swerve. And I'm like, what in the hell was that? I pull over, and I'm looking. Okay, it's there. I just pull it quickly. I'm like, okay, everything's safe. The tire's not blown. Then I drive some more. And I pull up into a parking lot and I'm looking, what the hell is this? There's no markings. There's no markings from a ball, no markings of a bird, no markings of an animal, there's no marking on my car in this strange dent. There's like as if something hit it, but nothing hit it. Do you know what I mean? It was an impact, but there was no sign of the impact. And I'm like, what? And at this exact moment, I thought of the reporters, what had exactly happened. The next morning, I go to auto repair guy place, and he's been in business since, like for 40 or 50 years. And he looks and he goes like, oh, never seen that before. What's that? And I say, yeah, it's me. I know exactly what it was. Mm-hmm. So in that dent, I have a photograph of it somewhere, so I knew earlier on that weird stuff was kind of, something was up. So now I have people, right? I have like 5 survivors, and I reach out to, I'll just say it, NPR, because they were doing that. They like reveal, and they had all these stuff. They had programs that would seem to do it. And I was working with a friend of mine in Union City. She was teaching a dance class, and I remember getting emails and replying. I was so hopeful. One NPR show was like, yes, and we emailed back and forth like 60 or more times. And back and forth and back and forth. And I'm like, this is going to happen. We're going to be an NPR. This is going to stop it. My sister Teresa will leave the house. All will be well. My mom will be healthier. We can turn this boat around finally. Thank God. Please. Oh, please. Oh, please. And they drop it. They drop the story. And after all this teasing, I think it was more than 90 emails. And I'm just like, I just can't handle it. I'm so depressed now because we're so close. We have this legit thing, and there's all this abuse.
Did they ever give a reason as to why they dropped it?
No, I can't remember. That was the thing. It just left me hanging like we're just not interested right now, or something like that. But it was all these messages, and then I try it again, and I get a nibble, and then that dies. So again, so now it's 2019. Okay. I've all these survivors. I have all this information. I have a Vatican letter. I think maybe another letter that I got somewhere, but I have all this information, all this proof, and no one will listen. And I basically go, okay, I'm gonna die with this. I'm gonna die with this. But at least I know the truth, and hopefully one day I'll write it down. But it's kind of over because no one cares. They won't get involved. I tried a bunch of NPR shows because they're the ones that would do it, and that's it. And so I go, okay, so I'm basically, I hate to use that cliche of like, well, the second that I gave up totally is the second that something. No, that's not true. There was always like at least 5% or more, right? It's not kind of like I was hoping someone would. But I said, okay, that's it. And that's literally when, like a couple weeks into that, I get a message on Fat Mass from this woman named Jessica Blank from Huffington Post. And that's where, and I did the whole thing where I had to prove it was someone legit, and then I email her, and then she asked questions about that whole thing. So can I call you back in like 10 minutes? I got to set up a band.
Absolutely. Go for it.
All right, I'll call you in a little bit. We'll take it up from there.
Beautiful.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, bye. All right, I had something to say before, but I remembered I want to say something. One was that I'm really glad that people are listening to the podcast. I'm so happy about that. But what I've seen, and even for my own self listening, is like there's this overriding sense of why didn't they leave? It was a cult, but why did they just get the hell out? Which is an understandable statement. The thing is that what I want to, it really make sure people understand is that, hey, look, this wasn't like a bunch of people in tracksuits and sneakers waiting for a spaceship to come with, $1.80 in their pocket. This was a legit above board on the outside Catholic organization. That was the mind screw. The mind screw was, hey, this is legitimate, right? And they couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And that's the real reason why some of them stayed as long as they did, because they were like, is this they said this is legit. This is a legit order, and we're meeting all these priests and bishops, and then finally they realized something was really wrong, and then they left. But I feel that people kind of need to know that, and I know people want more, understandably, like more shocking stories, more intense stories, and the stories these women tell, it's like this day-to-day grind of imprisonment and trying to figure out what's wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get everybody wants the car crash, and there are plenty of car crashes in this story, but a lot of it is just this weird day-to-day stuff.
Well, that was one of the tenets. I kind of formed like a list of commandments that I was going to adhere by whenever I started this podcast. And one of them was I was going to let everybody tell it in their own words. I wasn't going to do any heavy editing. I'm going to stay mostly in the background. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So if people want the car crashes are there.
They're there.
But I want people to understand what life was. And I mean, if it attracts 10 people, that's fine. If it starts attracting 2,000 people, that's fine. 150,000, fantastic. But what I really wanted it for was for these people who feel like they haven't had a very big voice to finally have that voice.
Oh, you've totally done that in spades. This is the one thing all the women have told me, and I say it myself, is like, to get, and we'll get to the HuffPo story in a minute, but to be able just to speak the narrative out and what happened and have somebody listen and just get it out, it's the best. It's the absolute best thing, because someone believes you and you can just state your truth. And that's great. I mean, everyone's been really happy about that. And like I said, Patricia got onto another podcast, and I was on that with her. And where it's going to go, I don't know. But this HuffPo was the validation, right? That was the thing that made us validated. I'll get to what went wrong with HuffPo in a minute. But even though all of us across the board were so angry, well, I'll speak for me. Everybody was disappointed. I'll give you that. I was angry and disappointed about how the Huffington Post story fell flat. More on that later. But over time, I was like, no, we got validated. A major news organization said, this is good. I believe you. We're going to lawyer up, and we're going to make sure we do the story. That's all we needed, because before, for all those years, for me and for them, it was kind of like, well, no one believed us because no one else had believed us. And so that's why losing the NPR story twice was so devastating. And I was really angry because I was at NPR, because I was listening to their like Reveal and The Moth and all this stuff. And I'm like, I have a story, guys. Give me the microphone for 5 minutes. I'll give you a story. So that's why we're all so grateful for you for it. And, if this is a really, well, it'll be explained in a sec. So where did I leave off? HuffPo.
Oh, geez. Yes, HuffPo.
Yeah, HuffPo.
HuffPo.
So I come on one day, and I check Fat Mass, like, for just to see if anybody knew who's reaching out or whatever. And boom, there's this email. Hi, I'm Jessica Blank. I'm from Huffington Post. I'd like to do a story. I'd like to get more information. I'm like, okay, who's yanking my chain? Who's doing? It's a joke, right? This is a joke. No one cares. So I email. Well, first of all, I Google it, and it was legit. She was a legit person from HuffPo. She'd done a story about abused nuns of some sort before. And I'm like, okay, well, this locks in. So I email and then I call her. I called Jessica Blank up, and she's very lovely, but I can tell she's skeptical. Okay. So I'm telling her the whole story, and I say, like, I'll get the contacts, the other women, see if they'll contact you. I said, but here is the name of my sister, here is her address, and here is her phone number. She lives with another woman in the cult called Jessica, and call her up. So my mom is pretty much an invalid, so they're there taking care of that thing. So that's it. So I hang up. I'm not thinking this is not going to go anywhere, but it does. And then within a short amount of time, like in 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks maybe, I'm in Brooklyn getting ready to be interviewed for Huffington Post at this studio. And I get there in the morning, and I brought like a billion changes of clothes saying, well, what do you want me to wear so it's good on camera for the colors? So she goes, okay, no, this is fine. You got great. Let's go out for coffee while they're setting up. So we go out and we start talking. And she was a very lovely person, very nice person. And we're just talking back and forth and blah, blah, blah. And then we're going back to the studio. We cross the street, and I think it was over a bridge. And she goes, I got a hold of, what's her name? This one woman who was in charge of the SMMI when Patrizzi left. When Patrizzi left and took a bunch of people and a bunch of money, there was a woman who was in charge, Demisi. I think her name was Demisi. And I could not, I found her on Facebook, but I could not, she wouldn't reply to any emails or anything. She goes, I talked to Demisi. And I'm like, oh, I stopped dead in my tracks. You what? Yeah, I found her and I called her. I'm like, what'd she say? I was like, you got to be kidding me, because that's the mother lode. Because Demisi was in it and then left the SMMI, left all religious life. She's still doing something in the church, but she was a good person that got like steamrolled. So she goes, all Demisi said was, believe everything they tell you, all of it, and then hung up. I was like, oh shit. So I was like, oh my God. So I was like, yeah, okay, cool. We're on. So I go into the room, and, the cameramen are there and the lighting guys are there. And I just sit there and I'm interviewed for a bunch of hours, right? And then they have to change the batteries in the cameras. So I'm sitting there and they're like, okay, hold, change battery. And the camera guys are like, whoa, they're in shock. And I'm looking at them like, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard nothing yet. You just wait. They're in shock of what I'm saying, and I'm like, you wait. So they're lovely. Everyone's great. The interview, the 5-hour interview or so, is about to end, and we got 10 minutes left. She goes, okay. She goes, I got one thing left to ask him. Good. She goes, you may hate me for saying this, but I want to tell you something. Like, go ahead, give me your best shot. She goes, when I first called you and you told me your story, I didn't believe you. And I said, I don't believe it, and I lived through it, so that's fine by me. She goes, but Jessica Blank, when I called your mom's house and Jessica answered the phone, immediately I knew you were telling the truth. Now, there you go. So it's a story that freaked out the cameraman and Jessica Blank. It's over. I pack up, I walk into the parking deck, and I'm talking to her. Now, I know these stories go like 15 minutes on YouTube. So I go, so what, are we thinking about a 15, 20-minute video on this thing? And she's like, oh, no. This is going to be a long one. This is going to be a long one. Well, okay, whatever. Cool, I'm glad. And she just interviewed me. There were 3 other people ready to go. So I drive home in this bliss. I'm like, oh my God, this is happening. So then I drove up on their expense. I drove up to Massachusetts to meet with Patricia Budd they wanted a reunion shot. I had not seen Budd ever. I don't talk to her on the phone. So I drive up. I meet with Jessica the night before. We're sitting around having drinks, and now this is like a week or so after my thing, and we're talking, and I'm like, so like, how long do you think the story is going to be? She's like, no. This is a multi-part. This is like a podcast. This is huge. I'm thinking, you only interviewed me so far, and now you're talking like, I'm like, this is good. This is going to be, it should be big. I mean, there's tons of stories and tons of great stuff. So then, so she's all excited. This is going to be a big, major thing. The next day happens. I hang out. And she goes, come to Patricia Budd's apartment at X time. So I do, and it didn't make it in, but I was reunited with Patricia Budd, and we spoke, and Patricia Budd talked about like the money, having money duct taped to them and flying overseas and all this stuff. And the cameramen were a little shaken. They were a little shaken. But I met with Patricia Budd. We hung out for like an hour. I drove home. So then there was the meeting there was another woman named Rose, who I think came in at the later on, and she was going to be interviewed. So Rose, I forgot the other woman's name. I'm sorry. But the big one was Georgiana. Georgiana was like, I don't want to interview. I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, okay. And it hurt only because I knew she had the one story that was the big one, which was the sexual abuse one. Like that's the big hitter. But I'm like, okay, you don't want to do it. That's fine. I mean, it'll be fine. Jessica Blank was fine without it. But we all knew that if she were to come forward and say the story, it would have just, put dynamite into the cake. Like, it would have been fantastic. So I'm teaching to someone on a Tuesday morning. This is after Bud was interviewed. And I get a text from, I think it was maybe from Georgiana first, or it was from Jessica, the reporter. And Jessica said, Georgiana's going to be interviewed. I lost my brains. I went, excuse me, I've got to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. I went downstairs to the bathroom, and I was like, slammed the door, and I was like, and I dropped to my knees. I went, we got this. This is going to be the biggest effing story ever. We got this. Everyone's coming out to talk. Okay. So, and then so everybody got interviewed, and then Georgiana, I think it was December, Georgiana texted me when she was done being interviewed and left, and my soul like popped open. We got this. Even if no one sees it, it's been recorded. The story of this is recorded. Thank you, God. Now, they did contact Teresa. They had to legally contact her to say, like, look, this is the Huffington Post. We have a story. We would like to know if you have any comment. It was hung up on. Now, they called her in the beginning of the story, and that's when I got a call from my other sister screaming at me, and my mother disowning me again, and like, what are you trying to do? Yelling at me because I agreed to a story with the Huffington Post. It was just a mess. And I was like, but I didn't care. I'm like, disown me. I don't care anymore. I love you, but this is greater than all of that. That's too bad. So that was at the beginning. Then at the end, they called up again, and that caused a lot of waves. But no, she never left a comment. Now, Jessica also called up every parish. I know she called up every parish in South River in the area asking for comment, and every priest hung up on her. Nope, don't. Everybody, they knew, but they hung up. And she may have, I don't know whether she called all the other parishes that Teresa was at in Connecticut and Massachusetts or whatever, but I know a lot of the priests and whatever had died. So I don't know, but I know that people hung up. So everything was set up for this story to hit huge. But it happened that it was the year of 2020. And it was set to hit on, actually around this time in 2020, it was a Palm Sunday, it was going to come out. I didn't ask anything about it. I'm like, it was going to come out, but then COVID came, and then the story it was obviously, there was no room for it. So that story got pushed. And then at the end of 2020, Huffington Post got sold. And basically, on the last day of work of Jessica's job at Huffington Post, they released the story in the form that is up now. And she was very sorry, but they just basically dumped it. They didn't want to put any more lawyers behind it. They just dumped the story out, and it was there. So, and that was it. And all the women and I were like, great. It's like, thank you. But, none of my footage was used. A ton of footage wasn't used in general, but at least it got out there. And so that was it. And then came the long, cold winter of just nothing. And the other thing that I should note is the priests in the area knew that the Huffington Post, called them. They knew about Teresa, but no one cared. No one cared. She was not reprimanded. The Diocese of Metuchen knew. And I think myself and the other survivors got calls from them. And we were interviewed, and the woman was very nice, but they don't care. No one cared. Not one priest cared. Not one official cared. They just don't care. So that's where all of that stands.
Thank you once again for joining us here on the Cult of SMMI. That's Wilford. Wilford is one of my 5 cats. He is feeling the need to be chatty today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you were a member of the SMMI, had a positive, negative, neutral experience, if a friend or a family member was a member of the SMMI, or if you just want to comment on something, you can do so by reaching out to me at strangepathwaysmail@gmail.com. That email, once again, strangepathwaysmail@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening this week. Take care of yourselves and each other.